Good morning, Facebook world. Thank you for your patience as we are in the heart of the Greenbelt this morning, and I've kind of went in and out of signal a couple times, which is totally fine. It's part of exploring the 2,800 acres of land and 35 miles of trail. Sometimes you have connection to the internet and to your phone, and sometimes you don't, which is why it's super important to always have a hard map with you when you are exploring the outdoors, whether that be someplace far away from New York or our Greenbelt here in Staten Island. My name is Christopher Ricker, New York State Parks Environmental Educator at the Greenbelt, and I want to welcome you all to another Greenbelt at Home virtual program. Whether you're joining us for the first time or a returning patron of our Greenbelt programs, we're excited to be able to offer you this virtual opportunity to explore our beautiful outdoor and natural areas. And so now that a few folks have joined us, now that we've worked through our technical difficulties of the morning, I'm going to flip it around to one of our environmental educators who is going to lead you on today's virtual program.
Hi Chris, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. How's everybody doing today? So today we are continuing with our Find Patch of Wild series, which is following along with our book, which pretty much lays out how this land was preserved and conserved and the history behind all of that. So where we're standing today we're talking about chapter 5, which really focuses on what was known as the Richmond Parkway, which was a highway that was slated to be built not too far from where I'm standing right now. And we'll talk a bit about that as we do our hike. But just to give you an idea, just standing here waiting to get our connection, I've counted at least 12 different species of animals. A lot of animals that don't live anywhere else on Staten Island. That's from birds to snakes to frogs. We have some wood ducks out in our pond today who are kind of visiting this area right now. And if we had built that highway, we wouldn't have these areas for these animals. So something to think about as we're talking today. And I think we're gonna go over and meet up with our other educator, Angel Ellers, and we're gonna talk a little bit about chapter 5. Hi Angel, how are you?
Hi everyone, I'm doing great. I'm actually doing so amazingly because this day is so beautiful. It's really breezy, it's pure spring, and I have this really nice little seat, which normally I wouldn't sit on a bridge because people cross it, but there's nobody here right now, so I thought maybe we could read the first part of our book, and it would give the Facebook community a really beautiful view of the little stream coming out from Pump-House Pond. So in the last chapter, we talked about how Greta Moulton and her league of very excited and active activists helped to save High Rock Park from residential development in the mid-60s. And this chapter talks about the further perils that were threatening High Rock Park since then that Karen was just talking about. But just to pick up where the author, John G. Mitchell, of the book was writing. Here we go. He says, I must tread carefully now across the shards of subsequent events, for I was a participant in some, a close observer in others, and at times a cantankerous partisan in the cause of removing the Richmond Parkway from the precincts of High Rock and the Staten Island Greenbelt. Therefore, I can promise no great measure of objectivity in reviewing these events, except to say in fairness that there are neither heroes nor villains in this episode, but rather two very different kinds of people, with sharply contrasting perceptions and styles and tastes. I mean, there were and are those who perceive the Greenbelt much as our pilgrim forebears must have viewed the dark and satanic forests of New England, as a place for wild savages, at once inaccessible and to be avoided, as fallow soil, unclaimed property, wasted and unholy land. I mean, there were and are people who actually regard the Greenbelt as a fire hazard and the Parkway as an effective fire break. who truly feel, as Robert Moses said he did on June 29, 1967, that preserving the Greenbelt as a natural area might somehow turn it into, quote, the most dangerous place in New York City, and who, like Moses, cannot conceive of any valid form of outdoor recreation unless it is played out within earshot of moving pistons. Yes, there are really people like that. Sincere people. They are alive and well, not only on Staten Island, but in Babylon and Albany, and even in Manhattan. The other kind of people were and are those with a softer view of the Greenbelt, the kind who are not threatened by voids on a map, unpaved paths, or blissful silence. Indeed, the kind who actually appreciate such things. To be sure, because of the nature of our society, these people also drive automobiles, and at no time have any of them denied the need for a better way of getting an automobile from here to there, or rather from Staten Island Expressway to the Outer Bridge Crossing. In fact, over the years, some of these people demonstrated a number of ways to get an automobile from here to there without obliterating a quarter of the Greenbelt in the process. But every time, someone from the other side would find a reason why it couldn't be done. And why couldn't it be done? Why? Because it was impractical and visionary. And that's the end of the segment that I'm going to read at this point. But I think it's a really, really great place to pick this up. It gives us some really good context as to what they were really dealing with at that time, and how we still are dealing with the two types of people, or more than two types of people, and sometimes those two types of people can be within one person. You can have conflicting thoughts or perspectives on such important things. And something that this chapter talks a lot about is, and the reason why we picked this part of the park, is because this is the part of the park and where it connects to the DEC trails to the right and Touch Camp, and where the parkway actually would have been put.
So I think it's sort of important to bring up, this is why we do what we do, to educate people. Like Mitchell said in his book, people have different viewpoints, and biophobia, which is the fear of being outdoors or being in the woods because we're so used to being in concrete areas where you can hear pistons nearby, as he said, it's a very real thing. So part of what we do here at the education department is to try and make people feel comfortable here and educate them as to why we shouldn't fear our great outdoors, right? We still have to be careful, like anything else, when we come out into our parks, any parks really, but it's a beautiful place to be. There's nothing to fear here in the Greenbelt, and we hope that you guys come out and enjoy it with us. So as I was saying earlier, there are so many animals that rely on these spaces, not only for food and water, but our snakes that we just saw earlier, our northern water snakes, use our hourglass pond as a nursery. So they rely on that to reproduce and have their babies. So if these things were taken away, there might not be spaces for them to do that. We also, as we're walking along, we have tons of beautiful native plants around us, so it's not just the animals. I actually see there's a warbler that's traveling through here. I don't know if we can see him in this little bush. So not only the animals that live here all year round, but the animals that rely on this space when they travel through, going to other areas. Might not be able to make that journey if this was a highway.
And since this is a public space in a city park. People of all walks of life and all ways of envisioning how to recreate in this area come and share space. So another part of our job as environmental educators is not just to teach people about the different native and invasive species that live here, but also to teach people about the threats that are on the horizon, and also to teach people how to coexist in a space together where maybe cultural differences might come into play and people might be doing things that you're not used to. It's really best, especially in nature, and I find it easiest when in nature because I'm most calm and I'm most kind of level and grounded to be able to really experience my fellow human being as just that here in the park. And I brought that up at the deck there because every time I'm there I think about people who come to parks to do freshwater fishing, and that is allowed. It is totally fine, but we do always ask that people do so responsibly by not leaving any trash or fishing line. You'd be really surprised how many of those bobbers we find attached to fishing lines stuck in the trees that people leave behind. So we just ask that when you're coming to visit the parks, that you try to adhere to the leave no trace ethics as well. Take with you what you brought in and leave all of the beautiful things that you find.
So right now we're walking towards Lake Orback and Pouch Camp. And if we remember a few years back, Pouch Camp was also threatened. That property was threatened. And because Staten Islanders got together and worked together, we were able to preserve that land. And it's the same thing that happened back in the day when we preserved this parcel of land. So Staten Islanders can get things done when we put our minds to it and we work together. And we have a really strong history of doing that. So we need to be aware of other threats to our green spaces and work together to try and preserve them. So it's really important. We do have most green space in New York City, which is a great thing, but we want to keep it that way. And because we live in a big city, it is so important not just for the wildlife and the plants, but for the people to have these spaces. So something to think about. We should stay politically aware of what's happening around us and try and prevent any kind of development in our wild areas before they even start. So,
Yeah, I think that's a really great segue to something else I wanted to mention, which was that in this fight to continue to save not just High Rock Park, but the Greenbelt as a whole from the Richmond Parkway coming through, that Greta Moulton and other of the spearheading activists created a group called Signal, which was the Staten Island Greenbelt Natural Areas League. And so that was a very important group that served the role of any, Friends of Park group or conservancy, like our Greenbelt Conservancy does, to represent that area. And in a lot of places on the planet right now, there are areas that are being represented by different indigenous tribes. So there's they're giving personhood to waterways so that there is somebody there to steward that land and to represent it. And that's what the Signal group did in the late 60s and early 70s with the help of various other organizations. And I wanted to read from the book just a few of those organizations because it's here, but maybe not that many people have read this book. So I just want to say those names out loud in perpetual appreciation for all of their help. So in the list of prestigious organizations were the Scenic Hudson Preservation Conference, the National Audubon Society, the Park Association of New York City, the Council for Parks and Playgrounds, the Municipal Art Society of New York, the Community Council of Greater New York, the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, the Appalachian Mountain Club, the New York chapter of the American Institute of Architects, the New York Board of Trade, the Women's City Club, and the Sierra Club.
So I don't know how much we can actually hear through the iPad, but tons of birds calling, lots of different noises that are pleasant noises and calming noises, and not a car to be heard, which is wonderful. It's very peaceful. And we're really lucky to have this space where it's pretty isolated from the rest of society, I guess, or the hustle and bustle of the rest of the world. So, and we're here up really close to Lake Orback right now, so if anybody was a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout, you may have come to visit this area. It might look familiar to you. And there is quite a bit of wildlife and plant life in this lake as well. High Rock actually has quite a few water bodies that are really awesome to come and see, because it does attract a lot of different animals and plants, so it's a really unique habitat here.
And most of these water bodies are kettle ponds that are natural features carved in and left from the last ice age. And Lake Orback is no different. It used to be called Flag Pond, named after one of the previous landowners here, and it was much smaller. So today Lake Orback covers almost like 14 acres of space, and that's because when the Orback local merchants, they decided to dam up the pond, which started to bring some of the water from the other swamps and ponds in the area, like Loosestrife Swamp, Hourglass Pond. Those waters started to come in and fill up Flag Pond until it was what it is today, and able to be such an amazing habitat, like Karen was saying, for so many different species. And there's a really great example of how human interaction can be very positive in an environment. That lots of people will look at how pristine a landscape is, and they'll see the mark of human hands and they'll be upset about it. But there's so much potential that can happen when somebody decides to take interest and care over a space that requires somebody to represent it. At this point, we are deviating from High Rock Park. We're going onto the DEC trails. There's a trail marker on that tree right behind you. We're going onto their red trail. And it's important to know that this area is open, but only certain parts of the year. So you can actually go to Couch Camp's website for the specifics of when it's open to the public.
So, sort of going back to what Angel was saying about human intervention, here we have our trails and we have a lot of public use. So we do need to have some stewardship. And right now we are, the Education Department and the Greenbelt Conservancy has created a stewardship program called the Greenbelt Conservation Corps. And we are always looking for volunteers to come out and help us maintain these areas. And by maintaining our trails and keeping things the way they should be, it helps to preserve everything else that follows, right? So our trails, when they're well maintained, protects the plants alongside the trail. It's better for the people walking, and we're also doing a lot of native plant planting and litter cleanups, because as we know, we see litter everywhere. And we're also doing a lot of invasive species removal, which is when we pull plants that kind of take over. So there's a lot of things that humans can still do, as Angel was saying, that make a positive impact. Human intervention is not always negative. And we hope to see you at our volunteer events throughout the year.
I believe Pouch Camp is about 100 acres. Not the camp itself, I'm sorry, but the DEC easement is about 100 or maybe a few more than that acres. And that acreage takes you all the way through to St. Francis Woods. And it's contiguous, so it kind of is parallel to the yellow and the blue trail that we were just on at Pump House Pond. And if you just followed those trails, then to the left of you that whole time would be this DEC easement. So now that we have another amazing view to ponder this next passage, I'm going to start with the end of chapter 5 here. And what I find really interesting about this is this book was written it was published in 1976, so it was written a few years before that. And at that point, the Richmond Parkway was still kind of a big question mark, because there would be progress for the parkway, and then there would be an obstacle, and then progress, and then an obstacle. So what we're reading is in real time as John G. Mitchell was experiencing everything happening around him. And so he continues to write. Yet High Rock prevails. Some optimists say it will, say that it will not matter much for High Rock if the parkway pushes through as Moses first planned it, straight across the north wingtip of the Butterfly, gouging deeply into the ridge between Flag Pond at the Boy Scout camp and the Loosestrife Swamp. Some say that the sound of traffic will be muffled by the trees, the few that will be left after site preparation. Some believing that automobile air pollution ended with the advent of the catalytic converter dismiss more recent fears that unconverted oxides of nitrogen will waft across the park on prevailing westerlies, and they'll be at intolerable ambient levels. And some go as far as to say that the High Rock experience might actually benefit from the parkway presence, inasmuch as the park's urban visitors will then feel more at home in the woods, within sound and smell of moving cars, and indeed, if one is sitting on that glacial erratic at the far end of the swamp, within sight of cars too. But as I was saying, it is all a matter of taste and perception. For my own part, I do not see High Rock withering on the vine should the original route proceed, nor do I see it blooming. I see it sort of hunkering there, thin and gray around the edges, like any other roadside park in America. A bland kind of place for bland kind of tastes. Yet, for a number of reasons, most of them having to do with the law, I doubt that it will ever happen that way. If I had to call it one way or another, I'd guess that at some point in the future, when we try to pick out High Rock by itself, we'll find it hitched to almost every good thing in the universe. And I don't mean 4 concrete lanes and 1 median strip. I mean wind and weather and rock and humus and plants succeeding, and tall trees dying of old age, and receptive, perceptive people walking softly and unhurriedly through the woods, looking for the kind of human experience that only an undisturbed High Rock can help them discover.
So I think we are going to wrap it up here, but as you can see, it's a gorgeous day today. So if you are around and you have some free time, I really suggest you come on up to High Rock Park or anywhere in the Greenbelt. It's getting nice and warm as well. So we hope to see you then. You can always check us out at sigreenbelt.org, which is our website, or join us where you're joining us here, either the Greenbelt Conservancy Facebook page or our Greenbelt Environmental Education Facebook page. You can also see our static content, our videos at our YouTube channel, which is the Staten Island Greenbelt. So we hope to see you soon.